Everything is an opinion until you have data to back it up as a fact. And your facts will change because what work today might not work tomorrow and certainly won't work in the future after that. People view experiments as like a nice to have and something that you have to go out of your way to do, when in reality, everything you're doing on a day in, day out basis in your account is some form of experimentation. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 7 of Performance Therapy. Gonzalo and I, we've got an interesting topic. We're going to be talking about the experiment mindset, how great SaaS marketers think about paid media. This is something that is so foundational to the difference between like folks that scale successfully across channels, they get tremendous traction and stride, versus those that just can't really ever seem to get outside of LinkedIn and barely make LinkedIn work and kind of spin their wheels. So I think the things that we're going to talk today about is really going to help hopefully unblock people around how to think about experimentation. When do I make decisions on, what to do next? Like I always hear, when do I pause something? When do I scale something, right? Like when is enough, right? What are your rules? What are your references, etc., benchmarks? All this context we will dive into in this episode. So Gonzalo, why don't you just start us off here and share your thoughts on experimentation and what comes to mind?
Yeah, experimentation is still a topic that even ourselves are looking to improve, right?
Of course.
Because the challenge that I've ran in the past was like, everyone is running a bunch of experiments, but no one is putting time aside to document them. Mm-hmm. So that's I don't think we have that problem to that degree, but I think a lot of B2B marketers will resonate with that because ultimately everyone's testing stuff, but you have 8 hours a day to work if you're lucky, right? And some of you guys are running, 10, 15 accounts. So it's impossible to analyze all the stuff you're doing. So when we talk about experimentation, in my opinion, it's impossible to do so without talking about documenting stuff. Because, and you always say that, like, you can't be a pro without a process, but to have that process and to implement new stuff, you need to know what's working, not what you think it's working, because now you can suffer from that recency bias, or it's like betting. When you make this big bet and it hits and you're super happy and now you feel like you're winning, but when you look at your overalls, it's like your P&L, you're losing money.
Yeah.
But the one that comes to mind is the time you won.
Right.
And with experiments, I think it's a bit like that, of course, with the specific scale.
It's like you lose 9 hits in a row, and then on the 10th one you hit a home run, and you're like,
this works.
I did it.
Yeah.
It works. And don't get me wrong, like sometimes that home run is enough where it pays for the other 9 hits. So it's 100%. And if you're not learning and documenting, I think that's the key word, is you're documenting so you learn. Mm-hmm. And through the whole goal of experimentation is to improve ultimately, right?
Yeah.
And this is something that we have personally really pushed ourselves internally to improve at. So for context, like in the AdConversion community, we've been sharing 1 experiment a week, and we've been doing that now, I don't even know, like 40 weeks, like 30 weeks, something. It's been a lot of weeks, and
since the beginning,
and we have all of these documented experiments already. So to be able to create that in practice, we have like 10 times the experiments on the back end, with the team. And this is one of the advantages of being agency side, is you can run all of these experiments and you can test the same experiment in multiple industries. And then you can see, hey, does it hold true or does it not, right? So let's go ahead and just start off with giving context to people around the mindset of experimentation. I think this is really important. And then from there, we can kind of dive more into like frameworks and kind of how our process looks for experimenting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when starting with an experiment, you should always have a problem that you're looking to solve, right? Because if we go back a few episodes and you go back to having a strategy plan in place aligned with the client, ultimately, if you're launching something, if you're doing that activity, it needs to be tied to something, whether it's top of the funnel, whether you're doing capture, whichever the case might be, whichever KPI you're optimizing towards. If you're launching something, it needs to be tied to a problem that you're looking to solve. If there's no problem, it's either something that leadership is pushing, or it's something that you're launching just because, right? So starting there is super important because, if you map out the problem, and let me take a step back. Like when you're looking to experiment stuff, it's hard to have ideas when you're forcing yourself to have ideas.
Yeah.
But if you start writing it down, it's okay, what do I want to solve? Okay, I have this specific problem. Okay, what are 2-3 things I can do to solve that problem? Have I done it? No. Can I try it? Maybe.
Yeah.
And at least for myself, that helps a lot. Like writing it down, or even if it's not necessarily writing, it's typing it on the laptop. But
Getting it out of your head.
Yeah.
Somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a problem, because you also have a problem. If you're thinking about something to launch, you ultimately want to solve something, whether it's lowering your CPL, increasing volume, there's something you want to solve, or you're looking to experiment. So it's like understanding what can have the greatest impact. So having the problem and what problem can you solve that, if successful, can yield the most impact on your client's performance, on your brand's performance, and just taking it from there. I think it's a good starting point.
Really, really important. And one mentality and one frame that we talk about internally all the time in the agency is everything is an opinion until you have data to back it up as a fact. And your facts will change. Because what worked today might not work tomorrow, and certainly won't work in the future after that. So not just taking things as gospel, whatever you read online. Like for context, like when Thought Leader ads rolled out, we saw a lot of hype around it. And then we ran tests. And then after running our own tests, we developed our own opinion, right? Does it work? Does it not work? Where is it strong? Where is it weak? What are the pros? What are the cons? And I invite everyone to adopt that frame. Because once you start to think from that perspective, you realize like you have so many things that you need to prove or disprove. And it can be like simple things. Like for example, I want to share like that manual bidding experiment that we ran for branded search. I think that's like a perfect example of like breaking the norm and not accepting things as, fact until you've ran the test to have the data to support it.
Yeah, that experiment was pretty interesting because you speak with Google reps, or Google reps reach out to your client, to your team, and they will push for smart bidding. But what we noticed was that we were just spending, and this client was spending over 100K a month on brand search, which is insane. Like not even like client plus alternatives, like just client, brand name, So that was pretty interesting because just a simple campaign setting meant we increased our impression share, our average CPC went down. I don't think volume was impacted that much. And if it was, it wasn't significant because the cost in their case was PLG, the cost per trial went down, the cost per customer went down too. And ultimately, it's brand search. Like these folks will convert regardless. So that's one thing, like defying the norms, because no one's speaking. I mean, with brand search, you see a lot of people saying the same. But it seems like Google is pushing automation into our mouths. And yeah.
And it's so powerful. Like if you get in the habit of writing your problems and then documenting your experiments, when you are on these calls with these platform reps and they're recommending things, man, like they hate us. Because they might be recommending a certain, like for example, a branded search, they're recommending max conversions or something. And then we tested manual CPC and we found like it was dramatically better specifically for branded search.
Yeah.
And then they're proposing that. And then we're like, well, wait a second. Here's why we're doing what we're doing. Here's exactly how you can see it. And when you get in this habit of documenting, you start to build tremendous IP for your company, right? Around what works and what doesn't. So
also to build that authority with the client, because if you don't have anything to hold your ground against Google or any reps, the clients will if it's a new client, if you already have a backtrack, is different. But clients will most likely take their side because, it's Google. These guys are the reps for X amount of accounts. They should know their product better than I do, better than the agency does. So if they're saying this, let's try it. But if you have data to show for it and to dispute their suggestions, it's a different story, and you start also building that trust with the client.
Yeah, and vice versa. Like if they suggest something and you test it and it works, great. Now you have data to continue to support that action, right?
Yeah.
So just to highlight here, a problem defined is a problem half solved. It's a really powerful quote. where I forget, I think it was like Albert Einstein. He said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend the first 50 minutes defining it and the last 10 minutes solving it. And it's so powerful because oftentimes we find ourselves not even solving like the core root problem. We're just like treating symptoms. And it kind of is like the analogy I was using, like imagine like you got stabbed, you know, and instead of like addressing the wound, you're like stressing over, you know, the paper cut in your finger or, you know, whatever it is, but it's like, you're not addressing the core issue. So by actually writing it out is really powerful. So let's talk about our framework that we use for experimentation. So for context, like for us in our agency, the same can be applied in-house. So for context, any experiment you want to launch, you can use this framework. And then of course, if you're agency side, you can absolutely use this framework as well for all of your clients. So let's just break down like when a brief comes in. So anytime a campaign brief comes in from anyone in our team of, hey, I want to launch X thing, what are the things that we have in our campaign brief to define our experimentation process?
Yeah, for the experimentation, we have the problem. So why are we launching that in the first place? Then you have the hypothesis, like, okay, I expect that if we do X, I expect, I don't know, cost per demo to go down. You know, you don't have to be super specific. Like ultimately you're doing something because you're looking to improve anything in your ad account. So you have your problem, you have your hypothesis, then you have the time frame. What I came to realize is that with the time frame, sometimes, especially when you're working with clients and approvals, like the time frame you set is not necessarily the time frame you'll run, but it's important that you have at least a rule of thumb, the thought process of taking 2-3 weeks to look back and see how it's working. Even if it doesn't mean like you're cutting the experiment after 2 or 3 weeks, you should be getting some learnings and checking how it's going. And then like that's the part of the brief, because also important is how you're measuring the success. So if when you're doing the hypothesis is, okay, if I launch Convo ads, I expect my cost per demo to go down. Okay, how are you going to measure the effectiveness of that experiment? Oh, I'm looking at cost per demo. Maybe you want to check volume because, yeah, like you have all these measurements, these metrics that you want to look at when it's time to analyze, because that also keeps you grounded. Because what happens sometimes is like you're launching this experiment, the core objective of the experiment wasn't met, but now you get distracted with other vanity metrics. Like, okay, I launched Convo ads, my cost per demo didn't went down, but my open rate was 90%. Okay, this was kind of success, but it wasn't, because the core problem that you mapped out was I need to lower the cost per. So having the measurement also sets that guardrail. Especially too, this is a simple experiment. When it gets more complex, and remember that you have to take the time to analyze. If you already map out what was going through your head when you were first putting the briefing, it makes it easier when it's time to analyze, because you're kind of a robot. Okay, let me look at these 2-3 metrics. Okay, because now this is the briefing. And then when it's time to analyze, it's pretty straightforward. You just need to pull the results. What are the core takeaways? 2-3, it needs to be actionable. From my experience, that's helpful. And then you should list 1-2 next steps. Okay, if I'm launching, going back to this example, if I'm launching Convo ads and I expect my cost per demo to decrease, okay, when I analyzed it, my cost per demo indeed decreased. What are we doing next? Oh, okay, that's when you look at the other metrics. Yeah, my cost per demo decreased, but the open rate of my Convo ads was 30%, which is terrible. Yeah. Okay, what can we do? Now you actually have another hypothesis. Okay, if I improve the open rate of my Convo ad from 30 to 50%, which is kind of average, right? The baseline, can my cost per demo even go down more, you know? Right. So it's important tying back the dots. Like, okay, you have the problem, you have the hypothesis, you have the measurement. And then when you're analyzing the results, it's important that you close the loop of that experiment. And you don't end it there. If anything, it should be like, oh, Convo ads were terrible. Let's not do it anymore in the next 1 or 2 months. Let's put it on the side. But you should be closing the loop. And if it's working, or if it's marginally working, not to the degree you wanted, but some level of effectiveness, that should fuel the next experiment. Because, and I'm getting on it right now, but like, the core problem that you have is still lowering the cost per demo, right? Yeah. But if that first experiment didn't get you there, but you saw some positive signs, it doesn't mean you should abandon convo ads. No, okay, let me look at all the other
You
vanity
iterate.
metrics.
Yeah.
How can I improve it? Unless it's super terrible, that core problem that you had is still there. So you can be making multiple experiments to solve the core problem.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to end there.
I think one thing that I often see, and something that we struggled with as well internally, is people view experiments as like a nice to have and something that you have to go out of your way to do. When in reality, everything you're doing on a day in, day out basis in your account is some form of experimentation. So for example, like I launch a campaign to drive demos. I've got 4 ads. I see ad 1 is doing better than ad 2. I pause ad 1 and ad 2 or whatever. Now you have to make a choice. Am I going to launch more ads? Right? You have to make a decision to help improve the metric. So people are doing this. They're just doing it unconsciously.
Yeah.
You know, and really what we're trying to do is we're trying to just take a step back, and it feels slow in the moment because you're like, oh, and I have to write all this out. But over time, you end up moving much further and faster because everyone else continues to repeat the same mistake over and over again. And you don't, because you're iteratively learning every single week, right? Or whatever the time frame is for you, and you're making those adjustments. And at the end of all of this work, you have this library of learnings where now you can really easily go to your library. And I don't even want to get into tools and all this because that could be like a whole episode. But you have your library where now you can really easily see, hey, what are all the experiments that I launched on LinkedIn? Right? Boom. Now you can see all of them. And depending on like how well you are in terms of like the briefing step and like the fields you're collecting, you can report on that. So you can see, oh, I have all my LinkedIn experiments in the create stage, right? And you can see all of that. And then you could also see the results, which ones were game changers, which one were high impact, low impact, etc. And it's super powerful. And it just compounds over time. And this is genuine IP, right? And this experimentation is your R&D process is kind of how we think about it. And experimentation can be as small as testing ad 1 versus ad 2, right? And the experiment is around like, oh, does this concept perform better than that concept? And it can be as big as this landing page versus this landing page, you know? So I think that's something that I see a lot of folks struggle with, where they think it's some optional thing and they have to go out of their way. But the reality is, it's like you're doing it already. It's just taking a step back and being more intentional and mindful about how you actually go about the process.
Yeah, and analyzing it too. And of course, like we're leveraging AI to help streamline the takeaways and the next steps.
This is an important one. I know you're breezing over it, but let's unpack that. So like for people, you know, so for context, you know, they're using this framework, right?
Yeah.
They've got a clear problem defined. They've got a hypothesis. If I do this, then I believe this as measured by this. And the hypothesis, I just want to emphasize the importance of the hypothesis is the hypothesis helps you understand, was it successful or not? And I think that's so critical because oftentimes people just let things run for way too long. It's left in limbo land, you know, and they're like, oh, I think it's working.
Even
There's
remember
no,
what you were testing in the first
correct.
place.
They completely lose the plot. They're like, what? Why is this even active? I actually don't know anymore, right?
Yeah.
And that's why the hypothesis is really important. So they've got the problem, they've got the hypothesis, they ran the experiment. Now it's time to analyze the data. How are you thinking about analysis? And like, what are some things that we're doing that helps?
Yeah, we're leveraging AI already. And I mean, I don't want to sound sophisticated because everyone's talking about AI, but it's just something as simple as, of course, we're leveraging a tool. I don't know if I should say it, but we're leveraging a tool to help us get those creative insights faster, like the data, to pull the data without checking the ad channels. And then it's using AI to help analyze the results of the ads and help pull the takeaways and help get like a draft of the hypothesis and the problem for the follow-up to that experiment. So when we talk about analyzing, we don't mean putting 1 hour aside to analyze any experiment. No, even if you're spending 5 minutes on it, that's already more than, I'm being generous, I would say 50, but like 90% of the people, because just the fact you're even copying and pasting and reading to make sure it's actually aligned with the results you got, you're already running. And more importantly, in our case, and as an agency with the creative team, you're already closing the loop so that when you're requesting a creative refresh, for example, in the example I was giving, the cost per demo with the convo ads was lower, but open rate was terrible. There's room for improvement. Now I can go back to the creative team and guys, this is what we built. awesome results, but I feel like if we improved the subject, we can see better open rates.
Yeah.
And now the creative team knows what they need to do. But if I'm just marking it and like, okay, done, saving insights for myself, I don't share it. Next time I ask, the creative team will look at it and be like, okay, these guys are seeing results. Let's do more.
Yes.
When in reality, yes, I want to do more, but we need some tweaks. And this is working with a creative team. If you're working in-house, these guys don't have the benefit that creative teams at an agency do, where they're overseeing multiple clients. So that's even more important because they are like this, and rightfully so. They only need to build ads for that specific brand. And usually too, like, they're not just building creatives for ads, they're doing it for trade shows.
They're doing everything, yeah.
Yeah, so they don't even think about it. They just ship it, you know?
Yep.
So it's super important that you close the loop. And it might sound complex at first, especially when you're building that muscle. But ultimately, as long as you're collecting those insights, pulling the takeaways, you're already doing more than most of the B2B marketers that we see out there. So, and that's also a cool to have. Like, some clients don't even have the bandwidth to look at the insights, but that's also cool to have. Like,
You
guys,
can-
here's
yeah.
the library of experiments we closed in the past month. Even if it's 1, 2, 3, that's a nice to have for them because, oh, cool, let me share this internally.
Two things. So one, if you're listening to this right now and the tech is like consuming you, of like, how does this work? You know, like an example. We'll link in the description for you guys an example of our experimentation library template that we walked through in module 5 of our Building a Paid Media Program course. And it's built in Airtable, so it's really simple, and you know you'll be able to see that if you want like a starting point. But it could be as simple as like a Google Doc, right? Where you have like a tab for each month and you write down here's my hypothesis, my problem, right? My KPIs, how long I'm gonna let the experiment run, and then a takeaway section. It could be as simple as that. And you touched on something really important is the value of experimentation is not just the insights you gain, but the insights the company gains. So if you're working with creative teams, you can share those insights with them. You can inform them, right? You can keep them in the loop of like, hey, what you did last month actually had an impact. That motivates people, right? They want to improve. They love that feedback. And then like in our experience internally in the agency, our creative strategists, like they're thirsty for feedback. You know what I mean? Like they're like, I had a really cool example, like creative concept that I launched last month. Like I want to know how it does and then how to, see how can I improve it? How can I beat it? And that's where this becomes like a game and it becomes a lot of fun. And on that note too, which we talked about this briefly in a earlier episode, these experiments can also fuel like your internal monthly newsletter where you're sharing these wins and these losses. And really, it's not a loss as long as it's a controlled failure, right?
You either win or you learn.
Yeah, you win or you learn, basically, right? I mean, the only way you really lose is if you're just being wasteful, and that's the other value of being these experiments is that you're being more intentional with your money, which is fantastic. And you can share these learnings internally, and then you can secure more budget from stakeholders because what you're doing is you're showing them which every startup leader encourages is experimentation and learning from failure, right? So you can show them, hey, look at all this experimentation I'm doing, how it's impacting performance. So fast forward in the future, you've already created certainty, you've built trust. So now when it comes time to ask for more money, it's a lot easier, right?
Yeah, and when you're documenting it and when we're talking about the future of paid agencies, like we're always talking about, okay, you go into ChatGPT, for example, and I'm giving this example because everyone uses it, and you ask for, give me 3 experiment ideas for this problem. Regarding paid ads, I mean, you can fix your input, whatever, and it will give you experiment ideas. But if you're in-house, you actually have to test it because there's no guarantee that's going to work. Even if it's working for 99% of the other companies in your space, it might not work for you. And the benefit and the value that I see ourselves having that library is that now when you're working with an agency, whichever agency, you're not only buying for their monthly work, you're also getting that knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Because maybe you think, let's do Convo ads. And these guys have run Convo ads for 100 other companies in the past 30 days. And they say, Convo ads aren't working anymore. Okay, so just the time it saved you not running, even if it's 5K a month, that's already 5K you saved.
Yeah.
Just because you hire that expertise. But if you're not like saving those insights and learning from it,
that IP is so valuable. Like that is like, I mean, there's a lot of benefits, but that like collective mind share is so impactful. The other thing I will mention as well is you want to test your experiments again. And ideally you want to test it if possible. And like, if you're in-house, try to test it in as many relevant scenarios as you can, because we see it all the time. Like we get false positives, right? Where we have one experiment that crushes in a very, very specific instance, but there's no correlation across the portfolio, right? Of other industries or other similar examples. So you want to make sure you test those assumptions and see like, okay, was it an isolated event, or is it, and this is what we call the game changers, where like they consistently perform well across the portfolio. So like that manual bid example with branded search, that was like a game changer because it consistently worked again and again and again across the portfolio. So for you, if you're in-house, like try to really test and do multiple tests. And I think that another important point here, because I always, whenever I post about experimentation, there's always somebody in LinkedIn who's like, you know, like I'll tout the number of experiments, right? Where I'll be like, oh, we did 150 experiments over the past, you know, year or whatever. And somebody's like, oh, well, 150, you know, they're garbage, right? Like that, they're probably just like small experiments that don't mean anything. And there's definitely, like going back to one of our points, is like you need a certain amount of volume to also get quality. And also small things can have massive swings in paid media, right? As simple as like changing a bid strategy. The experiment, it can be as simple as that, and it can have massive impact, right? On the flip side, you can have more orchestrated experiments that take way more resources and much more strategic alignment across teams. But you need to test more. I mean, generally speaking.
And when you have an established account, of course, we're always looking for impact. But like, I know I was speaking with Chris the other day, and he did this analysis with a client, and and he realized that he started looking at the data that the background color was actually moving the needle for them, which is crazy. Like we're always advising against testing background colors, but for him, he had data to show that using, I can't remember the color, but it was significant. The lower
everyone's gonna DM you now. What's the color?
No, yeah, it's not like that. But you get what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, and if Chris posts about it on LinkedIn without the data, he's like, oh, this guy is silly. He's testing colors. Yeah. But in his case, we know he's making. First of all, he's making a lot of tests, and it tests that when the account is already in a place where, first of all, they have the volume that even if it drives a 5% lift, 5% for them, it's not one lead. We're talking maybe about hundreds. Yeah. You know, so it's impactful in his scenario. So, of course, in 150 experiments, some of them are low impact. That happens. But ultimately, they also need to be applied to the specific scenarios, because what's low impact for a client spending 10K a month? If another client spending $1 million makes that same experiment and gets a 3% lift, 5%, it's impactful for them, right? Especially when you get to a point where there's not so much else you can scale. But there will always be those people.
100%. Let's iterate now to talk about rules and how you should think about rules in relation to experimentation. So when is it time to pause? When is it time to increase? When should we scale? And if you've been following along and you've set, you know, this is my problem, my hypothesis, these are the leading KPIs, you're already well on your way. Because for context, if I'm running an experiment and the core problem that I want to solve is I want to generate, let's use a hard one, because lead gen is pretty straightforward, right? It's like, oh, the cost per lead or the cost per QL. I want to use a hard one. Like, let's say I want to run an experiment around understanding the impact of YouTube brand awareness campaigns and how YouTube brand awareness campaigns affect my organic and direct traffic in a certain region. So basically, in this case, what we're doing is we're running an incrementality test where we are basically taking a variable and we're saying, okay, if we change this variable, what is the result of that? And most experimentation is some form of A/B testing. So in this case, we actually have a client that we worked with that was running a ton of YouTube campaigns. There's a really fun experiment. And they were running a lot of YouTube campaigns. And we really want to understand, like, how impactful is YouTube and the spillover and the brand awareness of YouTube? So what we did was, our problem was, we want to understand, does running YouTube ads actually drive a positive halo effect? That was the core problem we wanted to solve. So our hypothesis was, if we only run brand awareness ads, and in this case, what we did, because we were targeting Brazil, we just did it because Brazil is massive. So we just did it in a specific region of Brazil, right? Not the whole country. And what we did was we said, okay, if we see a notable increase in organic and direct traffic in terms of conversions and our cost per for, I think it was like Sao Paulo, compared to these other regions, then we would, mark it as a success. Or vice versa, if we see a negative impact. So like if we pause ad spend, will we see a decrease? If we increase ad spend, will we see an increase? So anyways, we did exactly that. We did out this holdout study, and we ran ads in that specific region, in just that specific region. And from there, what we found was, in that instance, there was a correlation, right? We did see an increase in organic and direct, which gave confidence to now expand the investment in YouTube across the country as a whole. And if you see like YouTube ads can drive direct conversions too, this wasn't really focused on that. This was because we knew for most people, they're not going to direct click from a YouTube ad, right? And this is an example of like how this can come into play, So now when you start to think in this world of experimentation, it gets super exciting because now there's like so many things you can test. And in that specific example of this holdout, the leading KPIs that we were looking at was what was the view rate and the cost per view. Because in our case, like in order to actually drive a meaningful lift in organic and direct traffic, we need to drive enough impressions, right? People need to actually see the videos and enough of the videos. So for us, that was our leading KPI, view rate. And then from there, we were using that to decide, hey, do I pause this ad? Do I need a new ad, right? We're using that view rate, the CPM and CTR to make those decisions. So then from there, we were able to make decisions within a 7 to 14 day period. We didn't have to wait 6 months. Yeah. Oh, did it work? Is it not working, right? And then from there, after optimizing that and driving to that consumption, eventually after our holdout period, we saw the overall lift, which was fantastic. The same is true with branded search. That's another experiment that comes to my mind, where we were investing a ton of money on branded search. And most people will tell you if you're running branded search on paid search, it's like a waste of money. It's like, why? You're already going to get the traffic. And that's what we were saying too. And they were like adamant that branded search was driving net new acquisition, meaning people who wouldn't have converted anyways. And we were like, okay, let's test it. So we tried, basically what we did was we turned off branded search in a very specific region because we don't want to disrupt the overall performance. And we saw a notable decrease in the number of trials in that region. So from there, we had the confidence already that like branded search actually makes sense for us in this specific account, in this specific instance. So when you set up the framework, now it gives you a lot of clarity on, okay, the rules, right? Of like, when do I pause? When do I scale? And you're connecting the whole thing together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's this example even on that brand search topic that comes to mind, like this week actually. Like this client, before working with us, they didn't have brand search set up, and we set it up for them. And they, when looking at the blended number of opportunities, they saw pretty much the same, like a small dip month over month. But what we noticed was like organic and direct took a hit because we launched brand search.
So it was the opposite.
Yeah, the opposite. And I mean, that's not something you hear often. Like the next month after you launch brand search, you see organic and direct take a hit. The problem is, and that's something that we're workshopping now, is that you have other competitors bidding on their search terms. So that's where it gets tricky. And maybe that's the experiment. Okay, like guys, we can turn it off, see if organic and direct can still pick it up. In this case, more organic, right? Can pick it up. But let's see what happens if you lose conversions because we have other competitors there.
Yeah.
But that's like the nuances, right? And that's not a one size fits all.
And this, like, these nuances and these complexities, this is why it's so important to experiment for yourself. You cannot just trust average benchmarks. I am more concerned with how did I perform last month and how am I performing this month? How did I perform last quarter? How am I performing this quarter? And how can I improve my performance from last to current? And continuously, fighting the battle against yourself and optimizing against it is really key. Benchmarks are helpful when you're starting from 0 to 1 because you have nothing to go off of. Mm-hmm. But when you're already past 0 to 1 and you're trying to go 1 to 10, it's all about you versus you. Yeah. And just continuing to iterate and optimize from there. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching this episode. We will see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching this episode. If today's combo hit home for you and you want to go deeper, check out adconversion.com. You'll find free courses, a killer advertising community, and if you're ready to scale, we'd love to work with you.